Hi, this is Paul. This is the second of 3 short videos on Jordan Peterson talking to Sam Harris and my observations on the conversation and my observations on celebrity atheism and all of this. And in the last video I asked about whether or not they are using the word reason or the idea of reason like a god. Now I'd like to ask if rationalism can govern human beings. Now I found YouTube's an amazing place. I found a really interesting channel. I found a very interesting video. Is Sam Harris losing his audience to Jordan Peterson by the mouthy Buddha? And I'm deeply impressed by a lot of the video talent out there. As you can see, I don't have any video skills to speak of, and so I just sit here and blather into the camera, and some of you watch. So many of you listen, which makes good sense. But the mouthy Buddha had a very interesting video on Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson. But then I was looking back over his other videos, and I found one that was on a subject that I've been thinking a lot about lately. I'm at that age now where I have to watch my weight and watch my diet, and the doctor gets on me about my blood pressure and my cholesterol and a number of other things. And so I'm doing this. And one of the things that I noted is that we don't know what to eat. That's a very strange thing. So I've had the same doctor as long as I've been in Sacramento, so I've maybe had him 20 years. He's a wonderful doctor. And when I think about the dietary advice he gave me 10 or 15 years ago, and when I think about the dietary advice he gives me today, it's two different things. Well, if I hear two different things from my doctor, at some point I have to ask, does my doctor know? On what basis does my doctor know? Science keeps changing. Okay, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it depends on at what moment in time science comes into my life and says, okay, Paul, eat all these carbs and grains. Okay, Paul, watch the carbs and grains and eat more of a high protein diet. I've lost weight under the high protein diet. I love muffins. I love carbs. I love bagels. And when I watch my kids eat those things and toast them up, makes me miss them. Now you might say, well, is this religion that's caused this problem? Well, one of the interesting things about Christianity is that right from the start with Jesus, the dietary freedom was a big issue in Christianity. There are conversations about this in the Gospels. The big showdown that happens in the book of Acts is over whether Gentiles have to follow dietary laws. And what happens in the church in Jerusalem is that they basically loosen the laws, but eventually Christians will be free to pretty much eat whatever they want. Now, religion and food is a very common religion, food, and sex. I could do a video just on religion, food, and sex. But what's interesting about Christianity is nearly libertine when it comes to food. Now, this has been an ongoing conversation. If you read Ron Sider, Rich Christians in an Age of Hunger, a very popular book back in the 70s and 80s, complaining about, animal diets and so on and so forth. Christians have talked about food, but food doesn't have a central place in Christianity apart, of course, from the Lord's Supper, but that very much has become a ceremonial meal. You get a little bit of grape juice or wine, and you get a little wafer or a little cracker or a little bit of bread. That's not sustenance, it's a ceremony. So Christianity, in a sense, changes the script on religion and food. If you're a Buddhist, there are some dietary expectations. If you're an observant Jew, there are dietary expectations. If you are a Muslim, there is the month of Ramadan, and there is compulsory fasting. There, especially with Protestants, there's no compulsory fasting. Some people engage in it for their own spiritual well-being, but churches, for the most part, at least in America, don't practice it much. And this continued into the period of the Reformation. In fact, the Reformation was more liberty when it came to food. Calvinists celebrated the fact that they ate sausages on Friday, and they weren't just eating fish along with the rest of the Roman Catholics. And this is pretty amazing, given the history of the long history of religion and food. It's also very interesting that Christianity and modern medicine have had relatively few squabbles, apart from some isolated sects like the Jehovah's Witnesses or Christian Science that have some real ideas about modern medicine, and a few topics like perhaps abortion or stem cell research that was a big conversation just a few years ago. Christianity has pretty much left modern medicine to itself. And while there are a lot of biblical literalists out there talking about geology and cosmology and anthropology, I've never heard of a Christian go into their doctor's office and demand a Christian anatomy. Because if you read the New Testament, you'll notice that Paul says things like, if we believe with our hearts, but nobody today imagines we're believing with our hearts. We imagine we are believing with our brains. And Paul talks about the seat of emotions in our guts. Now our nervous system is distributed throughout our body. But many of us would say, well, we're concocting a lot of our emotions in our brains too. So there has not been a big fight between Christianity and modern medicine for the most part. And many Christian doctors are going about their business, and very similarly to non-Christian doctors, this is not a big area of dispute. And of course, Christianity has been deeply instrumental in the founding of hospitals and modern hospitals. But now if you listen to Jordan Peterson on Joe Rogan not too long ago, Joe Rogan asked some questions about Peterson's diet, and Peterson talks about diet quite a bit in 12 Rules for Life at the end of the book. And he and his wife and his daughter have had a number of issues that he's been very public about in terms of autoimmune disorders, and he's very upfront about saying, I'm not a nutritionist, don't take any of this as nutritional advice, although people will certainly take it that way. But he's just saying, anecdotally, this is what I'm discovered. He's just telling what he has been finding. And what's amazing is that if you're having issues with your diet or issues with your health, you go out onto the internet, and just a few clicks away, there's a world of dietary advice that's being given, a world of medical advice that's being given. And, well, do you believe those people, or do you believe the doctors, or the doctors in conspiracy? My point in all of this is, you would imagine that if there's any regime in our institutional life today that is rational, according to the terms of Sam Harris, it would be medicine. Okay? Medicine has been largely science-driven for a good number of years. Well into the 20th century, medicine has made remarkable progress, and we shouldn't discount that. Medicine has made remarkable progress, but is medicine rational? When we hear the promise of rationality that I hear the celebrity atheists speak with. Well, why not? Unlike domesticated animals in the animal kingdom, we can give rational input or feedback. So I've been trying this diet for a while. Well, how are you feeling? The doctor will ask. Well, I feel this, I feel that. Your cat can't say this, your dog can't say this, your horse can't say this. And so, if anything, we should have more information about what to feed human beings than we have what to feed dogs and cats and horses. Why doesn't people chow work? Now, there's been a number of attempts to try people chow. Here's the one thing that you can eat, and this will give you everything that you need for health. Well, I haven't tried any of those products. I have no interest in any of those products. And this is beginning to illuminate part of the difficulty of imagining the Church of Rationality for human beings. Because, as I mentioned in my last video, rationality is a tool we employ. It's not the decider. Our emotions are the deciders. And now our emotions and our rational systems are often in competition. Now, that's a metaphor. They're often debating each other. Our mental minions are working back and forth and trying to figure these things out. But even when it comes down to something that all of us do every day, we don't know. Now, eating isn't alone in this. We don't know what goes on with sleeping. We would imagine that we would know more about ourselves than we know about anything else. And in fact, this entire approach to rationality implicitly promises to deliver on things that are most intimate to our lives. The food we eat, the way we live our lives, the way our relationships go, even large, complex relationships. But while modern medicine has produced amazing things, it still can't tell us what to eat. What does that say to us? What does that say about the efficacy of the project? Now, I am not about to advise that people do go to their doctors and start demanding that their doctor enforce a Christian anatomy. I am not going to tell us we need to get off of using reason and science for modern medicine. Far from it. As I try to figure out what I should eat, I would long to have modern medicine give me one answer. Because after all, isn't this what it's attempting to promise us? This unity, this certainty, this level of knowledge that affords us the control over outcomes that we want. It's that desire that is at the heart of the Enlightenment, and I would argue that that desire is at the heart of human beings, and this story goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, when the man and the woman look around and begin to decide, we don't want God picking outcomes. We want to pick outcomes. We have reason. We see the future. We can understand process. And there are things that we want to pick. So, has reason delivered? Why not? What keeps gumming up the promise of reason? I'll get into that in the next video. I was pondering this and talking about this with my wife, who both and I are going through this right now. And the question, what should I eat, has changed dramatically from 100 years ago. When I think about my grandparents struggling to keep body and soul together in the middle of the Depression, my grandfather as a poor country pastor, and the church often didn't have cash to pay him, so all these Dutch dairymen were giving him butter. Well, there's only so much butter you can eat. When they asked what to eat, they weren't asking about choice. Do we have enough to eat? Can I stave off hunger? How about us today? Well, we imagine that choice is a good thing, and so our problem is that I can eat all kinds of things. I even remember as a child a lot of the conversation about what vegetables and fruits are in season, because what you could get in the supermarket was very much dependent upon what is in season. Now when I go to the supermarket, the same foods are there nearly year-round, and the only difference is, well, these are in season here, so a little bit fresher, and they weren't just simply brought up from Mexico. Well, yeah, but we should know more. We should know better. Shouldn't science be able to tell us what to eat? It sure is trying. Is there one voice from science? Is there a monarchical vision about this is what human beings should eat? Or even, this is what Paul Vanderklay should eat? And that's where I get into this rationality illusion. We think we can be rational with nature, but colonizing always involves choice. We think we can be rational with other human beings, but this is nearly laughable. If this actually worked, we wouldn't be talking about it. I'm not talking about how reliable my Windows machine has become. I remember using Windows when it wasn't reliable. We don't pay any attention to it because it's not an obstacle. It's not even an opportunity. It's at hand and we simply use it. When we try to apply rationality to human beings, we always run the risk of tyranny. Because what happens is we say, well, these people are rational, these people are irrational, and so the rational should govern. Okay, well, how are you going to change the minds of the irrational? Because guess what? Irrational people behave irrationally. How are you both going to preserve human rights, which tends to be the enshrinement of choice, with your supposed rationality that is supposed to yield unity, conformity, and predictable outcomes? As a pastor, I see this all the time. People get older, they have more and more medical conditions, and the doctors will begin to tell them, hey, you've got diabetes, you can't keep drinking soda or Coke or Pepsi like you used to, you can't keep eating that junk food. And then I watch someone continue to eat that junk food, and I'll ask them, are you supposed to eat that? Yeah, but what? Well, this is humanity. We make rationalizations, which is a really funny choice of words. We think we are rational over ourselves, which is probably the most comical thing. In fact, all of the debates that we're listening to, whether it's Ben Shapiro talking to Sam Harris, or Jordan Peterson talking to Sam Harris, or me talking about Sam Harris, we would imagine if there was any rationality involved, we wouldn't be, well, there's obviously some rationality involved because we're still talking to each other, but the goal is that, well, somehow we can obtain answers. Well, what's taking it so long if we have such great faith in this? We are just really bad at it. Now, has rationality failed? It has failed to tell us what to eat. I say, well, it will in the future. Well, now we're back into eschatology. It has failed to colonize our own wills. Why? Well, that's the last video. Rationality is a tool. It's something we employ. We choose first and then pick up rationality as a means to achieve the ends we desire. It's far more difficult to talk about rational ends apart from, see, now we get back to the beginning, rational presuppositions. As I mentioned in a previous video, in some ways, rationality is like building a Jenga tower. The outcome that you arrive at the top of the tower, such as the Tower of Babel, depends on where the tower is standing. If you have a bad presupposition, you'll get a shaky tower. And again, the history of thought is littered with this. Just go back and read history and you'll find if this is our starting point, we use reason, and this is our ending point. And it's not that much different from if you have faulty data and you use correct math to it in order to achieve an outcome. Bad data means bad outcomes. It's just the way reason works. So to colonize our own wills, Jordan Peterson on totalitarian countries, one of the things that I noticed immediately when I was watching his videos, when he talked about in order for a totalitarian country to work, people have to self-tyrannize. And in a sense, that's kind of what we're talking about here, maybe in a positive sense, maybe in a negative sense, and this is exactly what happens in religions too. Now, my point in all this is not to say reason is bad. I don't think reason is bad. Reason is an incredibly important tool that we use to employ, but it is not, I think, what the celebrity atheists make it out to be. And then their plea again becomes nakedly eschatological. We are waiting for reason. We're waiting for reason to govern isn't much different than waiting for Jesus to come. And, well, someday we'll solve death. Someday we won't die. Someday these diseases will be solved. Well, how do we know? Well, because we solved them in the past. Well, some fairly simple diseases have been solved, and then sometimes we learn that just resolving this one disease doesn't necessarily yield all the outcomes it did. When we cleaned up the water supply, suddenly polio was out there. So then we had to take care of polio. And what often happens with these, with our attempt to colonize nature, it becomes spy versus spy, or it becomes whack-a-mole. So we develop antibiotics, and then the germs get resistance to antibiotics. And so we develop new antibiotics, and then the germs get resistance. And then we say, well, we should use antibiotics rationally. Well, but if I've got antibiotics on a farm and I'm trying to make better money, I'm trying to keep the farm alive, and the government is telling me I can't use antibiotics in my livestock because that's rational. Well, it isn't rational for me not to use it. And there again we see the trick of rationality. Where you start very much determines where you end if rationality is working as we imagine it should, which is something like a mathematical process. And that's the end of the second video. On to the third.